Picture this. Deep inside a mountain hundreds of meters below the surface, carved from solid rock and reinforced with ultra-high-performance concrete, sits what the Iranian regime believed was the most secure military complex ever built. Not a single window, not a single weakness. A labyrinth of tunnels stretching for kilometers housing ballistic missiles, drone stockpiles, and the most dangerous nuclear material on Earth. Billions of dollars, decades of engineering, and an absolute unshakable conviction that no bomb in the world could touch it. They were wrong. Because on the morning of February 28, 2026, silent shadows glided through Iranian airspace undetected. And in the hours that followed, the myth of the impenetrable underground fortress, the cornerstone of Iran's entire military doctrine, was shattered forever. This story is not just about bombs and tunnels. It is about the most consequential military operation since the invasion of Iraq, one that has already changed the strategic map of the entire Middle East. This is the full story of the fall of Iran's underground missile cities and what it means for the future of war itself. To understand what just happened, you need to understand what Iran built and why they believed it made them untouchable. Iran's underground military strategy did not appear overnight. It was the product of a painful national lesson. During the catastrophic Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, Iranian military commanders watched helplessly as surface installations were destroyed by airstrikes. The conclusion they drew was simple and permanent. Anything that could be seen from the sky could be destroyed. And so began one of the most ambitious subterranean construction programs in the history of modern warfare. Over decades through the 1990s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps carved a parallel military universe beneath Iran's mountains. These were not simple bunkers. These were entire operational cities buried underground. The Iranians themselves called them missile cities, and they earned that name. Each facility contained not just missile storage, but launch platforms, maintenance bays, command and control infrastructure, fuel depots, personnel quarters, and full communications networks. Some complexes extended for kilometers through the rock. The engineering was extraordinary by any standard. Tunnels were designed to reach depths of 80 to 100 meters below ground. They were reinforced with concrete rated to absorb massive blast overpressure. Critically, the architects introduced horizontal offsets every 50 meters, meaning that even if an explosion occurred at one point, the blast energy would be deflected rather than transmitted down the tunnel. Entrances were designed in triangular configurations, specifically to avoid radar detection from above. They were hidden in the steepest, most inaccessible folds of mountain slopes, designed to blend invisibly into the natural terrain. Even high-resolution satellite imagery struggled to identify them clearly. At the crown of this underground empire sat the nuclear program. One major enrichment facility built directly into a mountain was the regime's crown jewel, buried an estimated 80 meters into solid rock. It housed over 1,000 uranium enrichment centrifuges. Another massive nuclear site contained 2 underground halls capable of holding up to 50,000 centrifuges. And at yet another location, Iran had stored what international inspectors later confirmed to be its most dangerous material: stockpiles of uranium enriched to 60% purity. A confidential report circulated to member states on February 27, 2026, warned of a total loss of continuity of knowledge over all previously declared nuclear material at affected facilities. In plain terms, the world's nuclear watchdog had lost track of where Iran's most dangerous materials were located. So here is the picture as it stood. Iran possessed, according to data available prior to February 28, approximately 2,595 kilograms of uranium enriched to 5%, 840 kilograms enriched to 20%, and a critical stockpile of 440.9 kilograms enriched to 60% purity. That 60% level has no credible civilian application. It is the most technically difficult step toward weapons-grade material. In May of 2025, A major intelligence assessment concluded that Iran could have produced sufficient fissile material for a nuclear weapon in probably less than 1 week. That assessment alone, more than any single provocation, drove the chain of events that led to February 28th. What happened on February 28, 2026, was months in the making. Understanding the full picture requires going back to June of 2025. That summer, a major military power launched what it called the most expansive combat sortie in its Air Force history. Approximately 200 fighter jets struck 500 military targets across western and central Iran in 24 hours, using over 1,200 bombs. Targets included air defense networks, ballistic missile launch sites, nuclear scientists, and senior military commanders. Among the confirmed kills were the former head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization and his former deputy. Over a dozen top nuclear scientists were eliminated in those initial days. Critically, on June 21st of 2025, the United States joined the campaign. A new operation was announced as the largest stealth bomber operational strike in American history. Several B-2 Spirit stealth bombers took off from a Missouri Air Force base. Each aircraft carried 2 weapons. Those weapons were the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, what the military calls the MOP, and what the rest of us might simply call the most powerful conventional bomb ever dropped in anger. Each one weighs 30,000 pounds. Each one can penetrate over 60 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating. In total, 14 of these bombs fell on key nuclear sites. Cruise missiles struck another nuclear technology center. The sites were declared completely and totally obliterated. Iranian officials maintained the underground complex had not suffered irreversible damage. The truth sat somewhere in between, and it would take months to understand how much damage had actually been done. The ceasefire that followed the June 2025 war brought relative quiet, but it did not bring resolution because Iran, despite the devastation, had preserved a critical card. Intelligence assessments concluded that Iran could still access its stockpile of 60% enriched uranium through a small opening left by the strikes, around 200 kilograms, according to the International Nuclear Watchdog's Director General. 200 kilograms of 60% enriched material, if further enriched to 90% weapons grade, would be enough for approximately 5 nuclear bombs. Iran had also spent the months following the June war doing something critical: rebuilding and hardening. Satellite imagery tracked the reconstruction. One facility with a documented history tied to nuclear weapons development was observed being encased in a new concrete sarcophagus, then covered with layers of soil and sand. An institute that had monitored the site closely described the new construction as specifically designed to be more resistant to bunker-buster munitions. Iran was not surrendering. Iran was adapting. At a State of the Union address on February 24, 2026, the American president declared publicly that Iran had restarted its nuclear program and was developing missiles capable of striking the United States. Days later, a new report confirmed Iran had stored highly enriched uranium in an underground facility that had survived the June 2025 strikes undamaged. The clock was running down, and it ran out on February 28th. The new operation began in the early hours of that morning. The opening salvo was devastating and surgical simultaneously. The first aircraft in Iranian airspace were stealth bombers. These machines cruise at altitudes above 50,000 feet, fly over 6,000 nautical miles without refueling, and carry the most advanced stealth technology ever fielded operationally. Iran's much-publicized air defense network, supplemented by foreign systems, detected nothing. No radar return, no warning, no time to respond. The bombers came loaded with bunker busters for the nuclear facilities and 2,000-pound precision-guided bombs for hardened ballistic missile sites. As military commanders confirmed to journalists the following morning, no nation should ever doubt American resolve. Simultaneously, Allied forces launched their second major phase. Over 200 fighter jets mobilized in what military officials described as having attained tactical surprise through months of planning. They attacked during the morning hours deliberately, because most previous strikes on Iran had come at night. The element of surprise was total. In the first 72 hours, a total of 1,700 strategic targets were struck with pinpoint accuracy. Exactly half of those targets were underground facilities. By March 12th, a senior commander stated publicly that American and Allied forces had engaged more than 5,500 discrete targets across Iran, including over 60 Iranian naval vessels. The tempo of operations was unlike anything the modern Middle East had witnessed. The destruction of Iran's underground infrastructure did not come purely from brute force. It came from a combination of overwhelming firepower and a fatal strategic vulnerability that the Iranians had built into their own fortress. No matter how deep these tunnels went, they were dependent on the surface. This was Iran's first and most catastrophic design flaw. The tunnel entrances themselves, however cleverly concealed in mountain folds, were surface structures, and surface structures could be identified. Surveillance aircraft had spent months mapping exact coordinates with millimeter precision. High-resolution satellite imagery monitored construction activity continuously. Unmanned aerial vehicles detected even the smallest launcher the moment it moved. This instantaneous intelligence flow meant that the moment any missile launcher emerged from a tunnel entrance, it was already targeted. The second vulnerability was the ventilation systems. Underground facilities of this scale require massive air exchange infrastructure. The ventilation shafts, though often the most difficult surface features to identify, served as the lifelines of every tunnel complex. Once those shafts were destroyed, the personnel inside faced a different kind of threat entirely. The tactical brilliance of the campaign was in targeting not just the tunnels themselves, but all of their surface dependencies simultaneously. The third vulnerability was that Iran's infrastructure simply was not designed to withstand the generation of weapons now being used against it. The massive ordnance penetrator was not in operational service when most of these tunnels were designed. The integration of real-time artificial intelligence-assisted targeting with precision-guided munitions was not something Iranian engineers had factored into their blast calculations. The missile cities had been engineered to resist the weapons of a previous era. The results were stark. According to field data, covering the period from February 28th to March 13th, Iran managed to launch only 585 ballistic missiles and approximately 1,500 drones. Those numbers may sound large, they are not. In the early days of the operation, Iran's daily launch capacity was estimated at approximately 350 missiles alone. The rapid decline to those aggregate figures over 2 weeks tells the story clearly. Iran's strategic missile stockpiles had been depleted by 80 to 90% in a remarkably short period. The underground infrastructure that was supposed to guarantee unlimited retaliation had become a mechanism of entrapment, locking weapons inside facilities that could no longer function. Additional bomber aircraft joined the campaign in the second week of March, following the trail blazed by the stealth bombers. Footage from an airbase in the United Kingdom captured preparations that military analysts interpreted immediately. Standard cruise missile ramps were being removed from the aircraft, and 2,000-pound precision bombs were being loaded in their place. These bombers carry an extraordinary 34 tons of ordnance. They fly at supersonic speeds and were specifically designed to penetrate and destroy reinforced hardened targets. With these aircraft entering the campaign, underground facilities in multiple regions were struck with unprecedented intensity. The deep tunnel lines that had survived initial attacks sustained damage described by analysts as nearly impossible to repair. The nuclear dimension added another layer of complexity to the entire operation. One facility that Iran had spent months reinforcing with its concrete sarcophagus was struck on March 11th and 12th. Military forces publicly confirmed hitting what they described as a compound used to advance nuclear weapons capabilities, specifically a site associated with the development of high-explosive components for a nuclear device. Satellite imagery from a private company showed 3 large precise impact points directly over the main suspected high-explosive test chamber. An Institute for Science and International Security confirmed the bombs had penetrated the concrete encasing into the interior, with blast evidence showing the main detonation had occurred from inside outward. The concrete sarcophagus had failed. Whether the strikes fully eliminated the nuclear threat is a more complicated question. According to an analysis published in early March, international inspectors reported no damage to facilities containing nuclear material as of March 4th based on satellite imagery. Though some damage to entrances at the largest enrichment facility was confirmed, inspectors had been withdrawn from Iran in June 2025 following the earlier strikes and had not been able to inspect any of the attacked facilities since. This means the full picture of nuclear damage remains partially classified and partially simply unknown. An Arms Control Association assessed that around 200 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium remained accessible through a small opening. Intelligence confirmed it was monitoring the site with high confidence. When a senior official was asked at a congressional briefing whether Iran's enriched uranium would be secured, the answer sent shockwaves through the chamber. The official said simply, "People are going to have to go and get it." According to reporting in early March, the American administration was actively considering two options: sending special operations units into Iran to remove the material entirely, or inserting nuclear experts to dilute it on site. An Allied defense official confirmed that the president and his team were seriously evaluating special operations missions into Iran. A senior official offered context. Boots on the ground for this administration is not the same as what it means for the media. Small special operations raids, not a big force going in. This question of what happens to the enriched uranium is the central unresolved strategic issue of the entire conflict. The collapse of Iran's underground missile cities is not merely a local military story. It is a civilizational rupture for the strategy the Tehran regime has pursued for 4 decades. These tunnels were not just protecting Iran. They were the main supply and command center for what Tehran called its axis of resistance, the network of proxy forces stretching from Yemen to Lebanon, from Iraq to Syria, that Tehran deployed as a form of strategic depth. The Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iraqi militias, all of these groups depended fundamentally on the flow of Iranian missiles and drones. That flow came through the underground infrastructure. Now that infrastructure has been largely destroyed, the regional consequences are already becoming visible. Iranian attacks had targeted oil infrastructure, including vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply transits. Disruptions to that flow triggered fuel shortages and rationing in parts of Asia, and a sharp rise in global oil prices. By late March, officials were reportedly suggesting that Houthi forces in Yemen might push to block another strategic strait, adding further strain to global shipping routes. But whether the Houthis, who had reached a ceasefire over Red Sea shipping in 2025, were willing to invite another direct military response remained deeply unclear. The ripple effects of the campaign have extended beyond the Middle East in ways that will define the next decade of global security policy. One major power watched the destruction of Iran's underground facilities with genuine alarm. Following the strikes, reports emerged that energy and defense analysts published a proposal calling for an extensive network of underground infrastructure across that country's western regions to protect strategic assets. A chief technical expert argued that critical facilities, including hydropower hubs and oil fields, should be embedded deep underground. A major publication described this as bunker buster hits on Iran, driving that power deeper underground. The demonstration that massive ordnance penetrators could destroy facilities buried in solid rock at depths previously considered safe had sent a clear message. That power's state media expressed deep unease at the operation's demonstration of an ability to conduct undetected long-range precision strikes against hardened underground targets without any effective warning or intercept. The stealth bomber had effectively ghosted through some of the most heavily contested airspace in the world and delivered its payload with perfect precision. For military planners, that is not a tactical lesson. It is a strategic shock. The lessons are several. First, no underground facility is truly invulnerable when confronted with the right weapons and intelligence. Second, anti-access area denial systems can be defeated by persistent stealth and precision. Third, proxy networks are vulnerable to severing their supply lines. Iran's axis of resistance was not a voluntary coalition. It was a supply relationship. Tehran provided missiles, drones, funding, and training. In exchange, proxy forces created strategic depth, allowing Tehran to wage war without direct attribution. That model depends on the infrastructure that just collapsed. The Houthis, Hezbollah, and Iraqi militias still exist, but they are being supplied by a system that has been severely degraded, if not destroyed. For Iran, rebuilding that supply capacity will take years, and those years may not be available. The fourth lesson is the most uncomfortable. Military force can destroy infrastructure, but it cannot destroy knowledge. Iran has over decades built up substantial expertise in operating advanced centrifuges, designing nuclear warhead configurations, and producing key weapons components. The targeted elimination of over a dozen senior nuclear scientists during the campaigns was a direct attempt to attack the human capital side of that equation. But Iran's academic and scientific base is deep. One institute assessed clearly that Iran possesses highly capable human capital and an advanced academic system, and will undoubtedly be able to replenish this knowledge over time. This is why the question left hanging in the congressional briefing room, that people are going to have to go and get it, is so critical. Getting the material, or destroying it, or verifiably diluting it, is the only way to prevent a nuclear breakout that does not depend on the infrastructure already destroyed. And getting it will require either a diplomatic framework Iran agrees to, or a ground operation into one of the world's most actively contested military environments. As of March 21, 2026, the operation was still ongoing. Military commanders confirmed that heavy bombers had deployed bunker busters against a subterranean facility again. As of that date, Allied forces had engaged over 7,000 discrete targets across Iran. The air campaign had shifted in character, transitioning from reliance on expensive long-range standoff cruise missiles to direct stand-in engagements using cost-effective precision bombs dropped by fighter aircraft operating directly in Iranian airspace. The shift in economics alone signals something important. The United States had degraded Iranian air defenses to the point where its most capable aircraft could operate over Iran with manageable risk. That is a profound achievement. It is also a profound warning to every other nation that has staked its security on anti-access area denial systems. Tehran's position today is the bleakest it has been since the founding of the Islamic Republic. Its air defenses are degraded. Its ballistic missile stockpile is 80 to 90% depleted. Its nuclear infrastructure is severely damaged, though not certainly eliminated. Its proxy supply lines are severed or severely constrained. Its currency was already in freefall from new international sanctions imposed in September 2025. The popular protests that erupted in December 2025 and January 2026, the largest since the 1979 revolution, were drowned in blood but not extinguished in spirit. And above it all, the United States and its allies maintain near total air superiority over Iranian skies. The question is not whether Iran has been weakened. It has been weakened catastrophically. The question is what comes next. An Iran whose military capacity to project regional power has been neutralized, whose axis of resistance has been starved of supply, is a more manageable strategic problem than a nuclear-armed Iran capable of threatening both regional assets and population centers. The terms articulated directly are that Iran must achieve verifiable elimination of its enrichment capability. That is not a negotiating position. It is a precondition. And that is why the fall of Iran's underground empire is not just a chapter in this conflict. It is a chapter in the history of modern warfare itself.